what would be the edge a business has in the tech world?
Where are we heading to? What does the future look like?
What's the vibe, I should ask? Hello and welcome to Generation AI Podcast, episode 5, where we talk about AI, machine learning, data, and bridge the gap between tech and the reason why you should care about AI on the business side. How do you feel about our journey so far? How hyped are you? What's the vibe, I should ask?
What's the vibe? I mean, I think the vibe in AI land is still pretty hypey. There's a lot of noise still, but as long as Nvidia's stock chart keeps going up, people are still paying attention, right?
I guess that's a good metric. There's three things we're going to talk about today. One of them in particular I'm super interested in. Do you want to walk us through our topics for today?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to speak about vibe coding, which is a recently coined term that really dictates the whole no-code and low-code AI industry. We're also going to talk about the future of AI in terms of what it means for building companies and networks and the impact that we think that's going to have. And then finally, we'll move on to a discussion around the industry pushes for open source and what that means for SMEs that are building in the space today and using open source as the foundation to build models and products and features.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I think we spoke before on why a good foundation is needed so you can build high and build relevant things. But I feel like people are taking shortcuts today. So what do you feel about all this vibe coding subject that's going
Well, I
around?
think the vibe coding topic was really well captured by what I would call the king of vibe coding, which is a guy called Anton Osika. For anyone that doesn't know Anton, Anton is basically the CEO and founder of Lovable. Lovable are probably the world's most used at the moment or best known low code platform or no code platform, I should say. So if you basically want to spin up a app or a tool or a website super quickly without any understanding of code, you would use Lovable. And I suppose the reason why Lovable came to prominence is because they got to 15 million in ARR like 3 months after launching. And he recently came out with a tweet that said basically that MIT students were using Lovable to to produce products, right? So the specific tweet is he references a WhatsApp and he says, "How are you? Just came back from MIT." And they use Lovable at the Entrepreneurship Center as the best in class tool. Now, kind of funny, right? Because MIT is known for producing some of the world's best engineers, and these guys are using Lovable to build apps. But now that I've introduced the topic here, I'd love to understand your general take on vibe coding.
It's hard to have a take because it's hard to define this term. You can only guess what it means. And I guess different people have different opinions on what vibe coding is. I mean, we've spoke about AI agents for coding, tools for no code product creation on the podcast before. I feel like this kind of tools are great for building POCs, for building quick demos, for basically augmenting software engineers to write better code. But I feel like people started to use the term vibe coding when they don't have the knowledge to write code. They prompt a model to build something for them, and they keep repeating the loop of I prompted the model, I got a result, I'm happy or I'm not happy with the result, and I keep prompting the model to make the result better based on how they feel the vibe is around the result. It's still unclear what vibe coding is. I still feel like it's something coined by non-tech people that are trying to write code to build products. It's very vague at the moment.
Well, I think it's as I said to you, in the pre-recording, I think this is like an intentionally provocative term, right? I think whoever came up with this term, and certainly the people that promote it, are trying to get a reaction out of developers because development and engineering couldn't be any further away from feeling vibes, right? It's not about feeling vibes. It's about having defined rules, and even the I mean the limited experience I have of actually learning to code is that it's like learning a language, and a language has very clear rules and explanations and methodologies. It's its own world, and it's definitive and objective, and that is so far away from vibe coding, right? So I suppose, let's say we have a paradigm or a kind of spectrum, and on the one end we have, I suppose, early 2000s coding, where every single atom within a page or a digital product was at some point coded by a human being from scratch. There were very few templates, there were very few plugins, everything was built from scratch. And then 2025, we have vibe coding, where somebody can spin up something with no understanding whatsoever of what they're doing. Where are we heading to? What does the future look like?
I'm not very optimistic on vibe coding. I feel like it's a small trend within the big AI wave that's gonna peak soon, probably, and we'll never hear about it.
But that's not my point. My point is, where do you think the ball will fall in the end? Obviously, vibe coding is probably doesn't have a future, but neither are we going to go back to a world where an engineer is coding everything from scratch, right? There is going to be some interplay between coders, AI, and also non-technical users.
So you put things on a spectrum. I feel like on one hand of the spectrum, it's you, the non-technical person, building a product just with prompts.
Yeah.
On the other end, it's me, the engineer, using AI tools to still write code to build products. Those two ends are great. Vibe coding is somewhere in the middle. I have no idea where to put it in the middle, but the vibe coding, I feel like it's trying to combine the two ends in a non-very productive way. And let me tell you why. I'm not optimistic on vibe coding, but I'm very happy it exists, because I feel like the more the more people vibe on this, the more real software engineers will have work in the future. And let me give you a simple example. I came across this post on LinkedIn a few days ago, 3 different stories in this picture. To quickly explain what's happening here in non-technical terms, 3 different people trying to build products without having coding knowledge, just using AI coding tools to get their job done. All of them experience some sort of security breach. The first one is observing super high API usage. The second one clearly shows a screenshot with passwords in plain text. You never do this. And the third one is exposing some API keys.
Let me jump in though, right? Because I get the point you're making here around, I mean, clearly there are deficiencies, right? Like if you leave your API keys open when you're running a product, like that's a huge problem. But then you're assuming that these problems are going to remain, right? Like let's say, for instance, like these tools are going to get better, right? They're going to get much better. And if you think about it from let's take the optimistic perspective, because I do believe there is an optimistic perspective here. If it becomes 100x easier to build digital products, that is better for the world, right?
Totally agree. Yeah.
Better for the world, because right now we have like a massive global bottleneck in technical skills. And so, this is a real problem for startups, for instance, because they can't get a hold of the best machine learning engineers because Google and Amazon hire all of them. So there's just a massive disadvantage for people that are building digital products and services today, because there's a massive lack of supply and technical skills. And if I agree, vibe coding is very hypey and it's probably 90% BS, but the optimistic perspective is pretty exciting.
And the optimistic perspective sits on your end of the spectrum, where you use tools that create products for you just from natural language. I think the negative perspective and the the pessimistic view on this comes when you try to write code with AI assistants. They're very good at writing code. They're very good at augmenting engineers, but you still have to double check the code as being generated. And I feel like that is the point where things can go wrong. Totally agree with you that if building products becomes 100 times easier in the short midterm, that will be very beneficial for the world. People will be trying faster, will be failing faster, will be learning what business to build next. But I feel like we need to separate what engineers do and what product people do. When you mix them, you might end up with products that need significant amounts of work to fix later.
Yeah, it's obviously a very interesting development in the no-code, low-code landscape. I would say on these no and low-code tools, I'm bearish in the short term, bullish in the long term. Yeah.
Yeah, I can vibe with that perspective for sure.
Okay, cool. Let's move on. So I thought Dharmesh, and anyone that doesn't know Dharmesh, CTO, co-founder of HubSpot, also founder of Agent.ai, basically one of Silicon Valley's most successful tech bros, if I'm going to coin the term. But he came out with a tweet this week, and it really got me thinking about what the future of companies look like. And we'll bring it up on the screen just so that everyone can see it. But Dharmesh said that in the future, the most successful software companies will be those that have a network effect. The degrees of success will be proportional to the strength of the network. The reason is that AI is making the creation of code easier and easier. Maybe we don't get to complete vibe coding tomorrow, but we are definitely getting vibier and vibier. On the other hand, connecting dots and forging networks has gotten harder and harder. But when you do create a vibrant network and ecosystem, you have the opportunity to unlock a lot of latent value. Now, I think Dharmesh is tapping into something really interesting here, which is to say that, like, I think most people, when they talk about AI agents, they're talking about this in a vacuum, where they're saying, okay, well, we're going to bring all these AI agents into our existing workflows or our existing company structure and our existing infrastructure, but more or less everything that sits around it is going to stay the same. And I don't think that's true. I think if you look at how companies are constructed today, the assumption with which all companies are, or the implicit assumption, the kind of unconscious assumption that all companies are built on, is that 99% of productivity comes from human beings in some way, in terms of them selling their time for money. And then they input all of this information and all of this knowledge into various software products. We then scale that software up through leverage in some way. And essentially, that's how the paradigm exists. People build companies, companies employ people, employees sell their time for money, and then the companies make a profit on the productivity and the difference between what they paid the human being for that productivity and then what they get to charge their end customer for it. But if AI agents are doing 50% of the work 5 years from now, which I think is realistic, and then we're living in a totally different paradigm, and we're going to build companies in completely different ways. And so I think Dharmesh's point around the network effect and how we're going to have in the future companies that are essentially a bunch of AI agents plus a network of freelancers plugged together in some way. I think that to me is right on point. But what do you think? What do you think the future of company building looks like in the AI agent landscape?
I feel like the IP of companies shifts from lines of code to, as you said, the network, the data they have, and the business model behind the code base. If we take a step back many years ago, code was very proprietary and code was kept very, very safe because that was the IP and the competitive advantage of a company. I feel now with these changes in AI and with the new speed of writing code, IP shifts from lines of code to networks. And this is the reason why I said one of the topics is very interesting to me. the network aspect has always been something I valued a lot. I mean, who do you know? Who do your users know? Who can your users introduce a product to, and so on. I feel like the more you create a network on top of your product, the better you'll do in the next wave of writing code and building companies.
I think so. And I also think, so I think there's a push and pull impact here, right? So the push impact in terms of employees moving away from employment is that companies will need them less. There'll be less of a need, particularly if you want to run an efficient company. In 5 years from now, you will need to employ less people than you do today to do that job, right? Or to run that company. So that's the push effect. But I also think there's a pull effect as well in terms of moving towards self-employment rather than full-time employment working for one company. And that is the fact that the cost of starting a company and finding product market fit is basically going to go to zero. If you look at the trends in remote work, hiring people from anywhere, AI agents, the ability to build no and low code solutions, if you put all of these things together in aggregate, it becomes so much easier to set up a company today than it was, say, 20 years ago. Let's think about 20 years ago. It would have literally taken you a couple of weeks to set up a company through an entity, set up all of the legal contracts. Nowadays, I can just download legal templates for all of my contracts that are 95% what I need and get the company set up in a matter of minutes. I mean, the ease of starting a company is probably 100x. But I also think company formation is just the first point, right? The second point is then, okay, I've built a company. How do I now find product market fit? How do I solve a problem that's valuable? And I think it's becoming easier and easier to work out which problems you can solve and then how to build products that actually solve that problem.
I like how you framed it from a top level perspective. You build a company, you figure out what you're selling as a product, you figure out how you do sales, how do you reach your clients, and so on. Mm-hmm. But you didn't mention writing code or building the tech side. I feel like companies nowadays are focusing more and more on creating value on the why around their product and not necessarily on how to write a code. So they start with product in mind, not with code in mind. And I'm seeing this trend where tech CEOs prefer to outsource the tech work. Instead of hiring 10 people, they maybe hire 2 tech people in their core team, and they hire an external agency to build their product. Because as you said, they can reach global talent way easier. If they hire remote, they basically cover, they have a 24/7 coverage just because they're spread all over the world instead of focused into gather into a small office somewhere in a specific city. I feel like, I like the times we're living at the moment. We have access to opportunities. We have access to great clients. They have access to us and to many other people in the world. And
I know we need to close up this topic, but I'll close it with an analogy, right? Because I think it's a interesting one to think about. But have you ever thought about how, when you're looking at a distant planet, you're staring into the past? So if you look around you, you can see the present because the feedback loop is way quicker. So you can see the present and the past at the same time, just depending on how far you're able to look. And both are concurrent. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at now with AI, where we have this amazing technology that's right in front of us that is going to destroy so much of what is existing today. And the way that we're structuring companies today, the way that we're building businesses is pre-AI. But even though we can see it right in front of us, it is essentially just a relic of the past that is yet to be disrupted. I know that's a bit out there, but
that's very metaphoric from you. I've heard a similar take from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. They basically painted a picture on how AI helps you travel in time. Because what would have taken you 100 years, 20 years ago, takes you maybe a few days now, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few years, but that's still time traveling. Just because you have technology, you can move fast, you can see the future, and you can build the future. And that brings very exciting times ahead.
What a time to be alive.
Exactly. I mean, let's go back to the tech side of AI, right? And the new way of building products. We've discussed how the IP slowly changes from code, tech assets to more like what kind of data you have access to, what kind of markets you have access to, and what kind of value you can create on top of that. And I came across this post from Hugging Face on how open source AI is a big part of the future. And for those of you who don't know what Hugging Face is basically a big collection, an online repository of open source models, data sets, scripts that anyone can use to build their AI product. Of course, their business is centered around open source. They choose to make all these models public, and of course, they charge if you want to use the models through their API. But their point is that all the big tech giants nowadays grew and became who they are because they had access to open research, open source code, the best talent in the world, and so on. They're trying to push hard for open sourcing as much as possible in AI, both using open source code and choosing to open source the code you write as a startup as a means to help startups and small companies progress. The question is, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, if everybody open source AI, if we commoditize GPUs, if we commoditize models, data, what would be the edge a business has in the tech world?
I will throw that question back to you before I answer it.
Sure.
From a tech perspective, after you've commoditized all of those things, what is left?
Drawing the links between the dots, I would say.
I mean, I suppose you and I have a slightly different view on how products get built. I feel that products get built from the customer outwards. Or maybe we have the same view, but let's explore it. But the only way to build a good product is to truly understand your customer. And so I think there's what you're building, why you're building it, and then how you're building it. And I think how you build it is the least important of those three questions. I think why you're building something is probably the most important question. And so I honestly don't think it matters from a technological perspective. I mean, I was listening to Bill Gurley's podcast the other day. Bill Gurley, famous investor that has invested in multiple waves of technology. And he was talking about the founders of PeopleSoft. PeopleSoft were a massive kind of software company back in the day, HR software, and essentially the workday of their era, right? And the technology, the on-premise software was how that was delivered at the time. So this was before cloud, and no one had a way of buying software other than to buy software and actually house it on premises with their own servers. But the people that founded PeopleSoft, that made billions founding PeopleSoft, also founded Workday. Now, Workday was just the cloud-based version. So the technology changed, the way that we build products changed, but it was understanding the problem, understanding the customer, and understanding what the customer needs and why they need it. That's always going to be the intellectual property, in my view.
So you're saying that the most important thing for the tech founder looking to build the next big thing with or without AI is to focus top down, to focus on the client, focus on the problem, focus on value creation, and outsource as much technology as possible to people who can do it fast.
I mean,
outsourcing
isn't my bag, but like ultimately, you've always got to. It always comes back to money, right? Like, who's paying the bills? As long as the client's paying the bill, the client is the most important person, and the most important thing that the clients think about, and this is maybe something that a lot of people don't fully appreciate. Clients think about their problems way more than they think about your solution. So by the time when we think about how we build products, we're talking about how we build a solution. That is so downstream from the person that is actually paying the bill. Obviously, they care, but the most important thing is the customer. And I think we would forget that at our peril, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I think we're on the same page here that the customer and solving their problem is the most important thing. And here's why I think open source is important. Instead of spending a ton of time writing everything from scratch, you just connect some dots, try to solve their problem. If you can solve their problem, at least you iterate fast and move on fast, right? That's why I think open source is super valuable.
So let's see which method wins out. I guess we'll find out. But for this week, let's close it off there. Don't forget to tune back in next week for another episode of the Generation AI podcast, where surely something else will have happened in the next 7 days in AI. And we'll be here to give you an update on that next week. For this week, my name's Callum.
I'm Mihai. We'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.